New York. Madison Square Garden, October 1971. $120,000 in a briefcase at the edge of the ring. 90 men tried to collect it. 90 men failed. Some lasted 4 seconds. Some lasted 8. The longest anyone survived was 23 seconds. A Green Beret from Fort Bragg. A man who had survived things in Southeast Asia that most human beings cannot imagine. And even he left the ring with his feet off the ground and his ribs compressed, and his eyes wet with involuntary tears. The money had been sitting in that briefcase untouched for 2 years, across 12 cities. Marines, wrestlers, boxers, Special Forces soldiers. Not one of them collected it. Not one of them even came close. And then, on a Friday night in October 1971, in the front row of Madison Square Garden, a 138-pound man in a black kung fu jacket folded a program, put it in his pocket, stood up, and said 2 words, "I'll try." What happened next is the reason nobody who was in that building that night ever stopped talking about it. The posters went up 3 weeks before that Friday night. Red letters on white paper across every gym and bar and barbershop from the Bronx to Brooklyn. The McMahon Challenge. Beat the undefeated. Win $120,000. And below that, in smaller print that everyone read first, a number that functioned less as information and more as a warning. 90 challengers, 90 failures. Average time before defeat, 8.2 seconds. Not one man in 90 attempts across 12 cities had lasted longer than 23 seconds. Not one. The money sat in a locked briefcase at the edge of the ring every single night. Visible, tempting, untouched. A standing invitation that 90 men had accepted and 90 men had failed to collect. His name was Big Tom Harrington. They called him the Wrecker. 6 feet 6 inches. 529 pounds of trained professional muscle that had been built in gyms and rings across America over 14 years. Completely bald. The kind of physical mass that does not look real until you are standing 3 feet from it. His shoulders were wider than most doorways. His chest was a barrel of muscle stretched to its absolute limit. His arms were thicker than most men's thighs. His thighs were thicker than most men's waists. Every muscle group on his body was defined and visible and enormous in the specific way that 14 years of professional wrestling produces when the genetics are right and the training never stops. He was not fat. That distinction mattered. Fat was a category. Big Tom Harrington had no category. He was massive in a way that seemed biologically wrong, the specific biological wrongness of something that should not exist at this scale but does, and stands in front of you, and breathes, and looks at you the way mountains look at everything, which is without particular interest. A former college football linebacker who discovered that professional wrestling paid better and allowed him to do the thing he did best, which was be an immovable physical presence in a confined space and make every man who entered that space understand on a biological level that they had made a mistake. In 90 attempts across 12 cities, no man had managed to remain standing. Not a college wrestler from Ohio State who weighed 240 pounds and lasted 11 seconds. Not a Golden Gloves heavyweight from Detroit who lasted 19 seconds before his knee buckled under a grip that generated more compression force than his joint was rated to absorb. Not a Green Beret from Fort Bragg who had survived things in Southeast Asia that most human beings cannot imagine, and who lasted 23 seconds, the longest in the history of the challenge, before his feet left the floor, and the arena went the specific silent way arenas go when something inevitable has just been confirmed. 90 men, 90 failures, the briefcase untouched, the $120,000 uncollected. The challenge continuing its tour of American cities with the specific momentum of something that has never been interrupted and expects never to be. Vince McMahon had been in the wrestling business long enough to understand that what he was selling was not athletic competition. Athletic competition had weight classes and referees and rules designed to produce outcomes that could be described as fair. What he was selling was something older and simpler, the specific human response to the question of what happens when an unstoppable force meets whatever the available resistance happens to be tonight. 90 and 0. Red letters on white paper. A black leather briefcase with gold clasps. He knew how to sell this. He had been selling it for 2 years across 12 cities. What he did not know, standing at ringside on this Friday night in October 1971, microphone in hand, briefcase open beside him, $120,000 glowing under the spotlight, was that somewhere in the front row of Madison Square Garden, a man was reading the program with the specific quality of attention that programs do not usually receive, and that the number 8.2 seconds had just done something to that man's expression, which was nothing, which was the specific nothing that precedes everything. His name was Bruce Lee, 30 years old, 138 pounds, 5 feet 7, black kung fu jacket, black kung fu trousers, black cloth shoes, black hair. The same man who walked into the Long Beach International Karate Championship 7 years earlier and demonstrated something in front of 500 martial artists that none of them had a vocabulary for, something that moved faster than their vocabularies could accommodate and hit harder than their categories could explain. The same man who played Kato on television and moved so quickly that the production team asked him to slow down because the cameras at normal speed produced only a blur. The same man who could generate from 1 inch enough force to send a 200-pound man across a room in a way that the man could not reconstruct afterward in any vocabulary his training had given him. That man was in the front row, alone, reading a program that said no human being had survived longer than 23 seconds against the wrecker, and something behind his eyes had just changed in the specific way that things change behind Bruce Lee's eyes when a problem presents itself that he finds worth solving. 3 days earlier, Bruce had heard about the challenge. Not from a friend, not from a newspaper. From a phone call with a promoter who had been to 2 of the 12 cities and described the pattern in enough detail that Bruce had asked the only 2 questions that mattered. How does he close the distance? And what does he do in the first second? Both arms wide, forward rush, head slightly down, the specific committed entry of someone whose mass had always been sufficient. Bruce said nothing for 3 seconds. Then he spoke. The center line is open during the entry. Both arms out means the chest and throat, and solar plexus are accessible for approximately 1.5 seconds. That's 1.5 seconds where there is 0 protection. The promoter felt the specific chill of someone who has just heard a problem solved in a single sentence that 90 people spent an average of 8.2 seconds discovering was not solved. "Get me a ticket," Bruce said. "Front row. Now he is here." Front row. Madison Square Garden, October 1971. Alone. The program in his hand says 8.2 seconds. Average time before defeat. Bruce reads it once, reads it twice, folds it, slides it into his jacket pocket. He has already memorized the only number that matters. Not 8.2, not 23, not 120,000, 1.5. That is the number this entire evening resolves to, the 1.5 seconds that 90 men never found. The window that opens during the entry when both arms are extended and the center line has no protection. 90 men asked the wrong question. They asked, "How do I survive?" Bruce Lee asked what happens in the first 1.5 seconds. That is the difference. That is always the difference. The lights dim. A single spotlight hits the center of the ring. The crowd noise drops from the roar of 15,000 people who have been waiting for something to the murmur of 15,000 people who can feel it arriving. Then, silence. Vince McMahon steps to the center of the ring, microphone raised, expression of a man who has done this in 12 cities and knows exactly what he is doing. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the main event of the World Wrestling Showcase. 90 challengers across 12 cities, 90 defeats. The longest survival, 23 seconds. A Green Beret from Fort Bragg who walked with a limp for 4 weeks afterward. The prize, $120,000 in cash, in the briefcase at the edge of the ring, which you can see, which is real, which is yours if you can do what 90 men could not do. The rules are simple. Remain on your feet, conscious, inside the ropes for 30 seconds. 30 seconds, and $120,000 is yours. McMahon pauses, lets the silence find its maximum density. He gestures toward the curtain, and now please welcome the man who has made that money untouchable for 2 years across 12 cities. Standing 6 feet 6, 529 pounds, undefeated in 90 challenges. The wrecker, Big Tom Harrington. The ring shakes before he appears. The actual canvas and frame of Madison Square Garden vibrates under 529 pounds walking toward it with the specific committed stride of someone who has never once had reason to modify that stride. The crowd produces the involuntary sound of 15,000 nervous systems registering something that exceeds their calibration. He comes through the curtain and they see him, and the sound changes into something quieter and more fundamental. He is not fat. That is the first thing every person who describes this moment mentions, because fat would have a category. Big Tom Harrington has no category. Completely bald, shoulders wider than doorways, chest a barrel of muscle stretched to its limit, arms thicker than most men's thighs, thighs thicker than most men's waists. Every muscle group defined and enormous and visible under the spotlight. Black shorts, black wrestling boots. The specific biological wrongness of 529 pounds of conditioned human mass standing under a spotlight doing nothing except existing, which is sufficient. He walks to center ring and does not flex and does not pose. His existence is his demonstration. He has a ritual. He picks up a wooden folding chair, one hand. He closes his fist. The chair does not break. It compresses. In 4 seconds, a functional piece of furniture becomes a dense, twisted object no larger than a loaf of bread, and he drops it, and the sound it makes is too small for what it was, and one woman in the 3rd row stands up and leaves, and everyone who watches her go understands exactly why, and several of them wish they had her clarity. 3 challengers go before Vince McMahon scans the crowd for a 4th. A construction worker from Queens, 220 pounds, 9.1 seconds. A bouncer from Midtown, 240 pounds, 14.3 seconds, the longest of the evening, which produced a specific quality of hope in the audience that the 15th second immediately extinguished. A college wrestler from New Jersey, 210 pounds, 7.8 seconds, 3 more failures. The briefcase still locked. $120,000 still untouched. The audience has done the mathematics. Size wins. Mass wins. Gravity wins. The laws of physics are undefeated, just like Big Tom Harrington. McMahon raised the microphone. "Anyone else?" he said. "Last call. $120,000. 30 seconds. Anyone?" And the room said no with its silence, said no with the collective wisdom of 15,000 people who had just watched 3 men fail and performed the arithmetic and found that the arithmetic does not change based on who performs it. McMahon waited. He was already closing the challenge in his mind. 93 and counting. Then the voice came from the front row. "I'll try." Quiet. Conversational. 2 words spoken the way you'd order coffee. McMahon squinted into the darkness beyond the spotlight. "Who said that?" "I did." A man stood up. Front row. Black kung fu jacket. Black kung fu trousers. Black cloth shoes. Black hair. Small. Not small in the absolute sense, but small in the specific sense of someone who has just volunteered to stand in a ring with 529 pounds of undefeated professional wrestler whose every muscle group is defined and enormous, and whose arms are thicker than most men's thighs. The 3 men who just failed were 220, 240, and 210 pounds. This man looked significantly lighter than any of them. Protective laughter moved through the crowd. "Please, don't do this to yourself." A man 2 seats away said to his wife, "This is not going to go well for that guy." McMahon hesitated. "Sir, are you sure? You understand what you just saw?" "I saw it clearly," the man said. His voice was calm, almost amused. "That's why I'm volunteering." Bruce Lee walked toward the ring. 15,000 people watched him, every single one thinking the same thing. This man is going to get hurt. He was too small, too light. The 3 men who just failed had a combined weight advantage of 530 pounds over the wrecker, and they still failed. This man looked like he could stand in the wrecker's shadow without being seen. The walk from the front row to the ring was 20 feet. Bruce covered it in exactly the time it takes for a crowd to begin feeling guilty about watching. This feels wrong. This feels like watching someone walk into traffic. He reached the ring, climbed through the ropes. His feet made almost no sound on the canvas. Where Big Tom had made the ring shake, Bruce made it whisper. He walked to center ring, and for the first time the crowd saw them together under the same spotlight. Big Tom Harrington, completely bald, 6'6", 529 pounds, black shorts, black wrestling boots, every muscle group defined and enormous, shoulders wider than doorways, arms thicker than most men's thighs. The shadow he cast covering half the ring. And Bruce Lee, 5'7", 138 pounds, black kung fu jacket, black kung fu trousers, black cloth shoes, black hair, standing completely still, dark eyes not on Big Tom's face, but on his center, on the space between his arms, on the 1.5 seconds. The image was so complete in its contradiction that a man in the 8th row stood up and shouted, "Don't do it, kid." Bruce did not turn around. He was already past the point where words from strangers in the 8th row constituted relevant information. McMahon approached with a clipboard. Name, Bruce Lee. Weight, 138 pounds. McMahon's pen stopped. He looked at Big Tom. He looked back at Bruce. 138. That's correct. Sir, the lightest challenger tonight was 210 pounds. The lightest ever was 172 pounds. You're 138. I can count, Bruce said. Martial arts background, Jeet Kune Do, Wing Chun, Chinese boxing. McMahon had not heard of Jeet Kune Do. He wrote Chinese martial arts and moved on. Any injuries or medical conditions? None, Bruce said. But you should have a medical team ready. We always do, for the challenger. Bruce looked at him. His expression was perfectly neutral. I wasn't talking about me. McMahon walked away confused. In his corner, Big Tom watched this small man go through the registration process with the expression of no expression. 138 pounds. Irrelevant. Grab, compress, done. But something made him look twice. He could not identify what. Something in the way this small man moved. Something in the way he stood. His feet were not planted the way frightened men planted their feet, wide and rigid, bracing for impact. This man's feet were light. His weight was slightly forward, not defending, preparing to move. Big Tom dismissed the thought. Move where? 529 pounds of committed momentum could follow anything. He had been doing this in 12 cities. He knew where every possible movement ended. They all ended the same way. He would remember dismissing this thought later. He would have a long time to remember it. McMahon returned to center ring. Ladies and gentlemen, our final challenger, Bruce Lee, 138 pounds, representing Chinese martial arts. The crowd applauded politely, the way crowds applaud for people they expect to see carried out on a stretcher. A few people recognized the name. Whispers. That's the guy from the Green Hornet. Is he serious? He's going to die up there. One older man near the back, who had spent 35 years training in traditional Chinese martial arts, gripped his armrest and said nothing. He knew what Jeet Kune Do was designed for. Not tournaments and not demonstrations, but something simpler and more fundamental. The honest expression of what a human body can do when it has been trained to respond to what is actually present, rather than what a style has prepared it to expect. He watched Bruce Lee stand in the center of the ring and saw something in the way Bruce stood that the rest of the crowd could not read. The weight forward. The hands loose. The eyes not on Big Tom's face, but on his center. On the space between his enormous arms. On the 1.5 seconds. The old man released his armrest and leaned back. He already knew how this ended. The bell rang. Big Tom did what Big Tom always did. He exploded forward, both arms wide, head slightly down, 529 pounds of muscle and mass closing the distance in under 2 seconds. Black shorts and black wrestling boots, carrying that enormous frame across the canvas with the specific committed momentum of something that has been sufficient 90 times and sees no reason this time would be different. This was the moment that had ended every challenger. The rush, the avalanche, the tsunami of mass that no response had ever answered. Freeze, retreat, attack. 90 men across 12 cities. Not one fourth option. Bruce Lee chose the fourth option. He moved forward. Not back. Not sideways. Forward, into the rush. And the crowd gasped, and several people looked away, because the mathematics said this man was about to be destroyed. But Bruce Lee was not where Big Tom expected him to be. In the 1.8 seconds it took Big Tom to cross the ring, Bruce had moved forward and to the left. 18 inches. just enough to be outside the arc of the outstretched arms, just enough to let 529 pounds of momentum rush past him like a freight train passing a man 1 foot from the track. You feel the wind. You feel the canvas shake. But you are untouched. Big Tom's arms closed on empty air. For the first time in 90 challengers, Big Tom Harrington had grabbed nothing. He turned around, confused. This had never happened. He charged again, faster, angrier, arms sweeping wider, the enormous muscles of his shoulders and arms covering more and more space, leaving what he believed was no escape. Bruce moved again, and this time, as the massive right arm swept past him, Bruce's left hand touched it, 2 fingers on the inside of the wrist, not pushing, not grabbing, guiding. The arm traveled 2 inches further than intended. 2 inches. In combat, 2 inches is the entire difference between capture and freedom. Big Tom's arms closed behind Bruce, closed on each other. 529 pounds of professional wrestler standing briefly embracing himself, while a 138-pound man stood calmly behind him like a matador who had just let the bull pass. The crowd could not process what it was seeing. 15,000 brains rejecting information their eyes were providing. This was not surviving. This was a 138-pound man making a 529-pound enormously muscled wrestler miss repeatedly, effortlessly, as if arranged in advance. Big Tom's frustration was real. His confusion was genuine. His breath was getting heavier. He had never worked this hard, never had to chase a challenger. Challengers came to him. They got grabbed. They failed. That was the script. This man was rewriting the script. Big Tom charged a 3rd time with everything he had. No strategy, no technique, pure, committed mass. All 529 pounds of it. Every muscle group committed. The mountain deciding to simply be the mountain without qualification. Completely bald head down, black shorts, black boots. The specific biological wrongness of his frame accelerating across the canvas. And this time, Bruce did not evade. He stepped inside, impossibly close, inside the radius of the enormous arms where the grip has no leverage. His right foot planted between Big Tom's massive black wrestling boots. His right hand rose, open palm, aimed at the chin. It stopped 1 inch away. Not a strike. A demonstration. 1 inch between Bruce Lee's open palm and Big Tom Harrington's jaw. 1 inch between standing and not standing. 1 inch between the outcome Big Tom had delivered 90 times and the outcome that had never happened until tonight. Bruce held it there. 1 second, 2, 3. Big Tom went completely still. His eyes crossed, trying to focus on the hand below his chin. He understood. For the first time in 14 years of professional wrestling, Big Tom Harrington understood that this man had known where his hand would be before he entered the ring, before he walked 20 feet from the front row, before he said 2 quiet words in the tone of someone ordering coffee, before he folded a program and memorized the only number that mattered. Not 8.2, not 23, not 120,000. 1.5. This was never a survival challenge for Bruce Lee. It was a geometry problem, and it had been solved. Madison Square Garden held its breath for 3 seconds. Then it detonated. 15,000 people erupting simultaneously, standing, shouting, the floor shaking harder than Big Tom's footsteps had ever made it shake. The sound of 15,000 people revising their understanding of what was possible in real time. Bruce stepped back, bowed slightly, walked to the ropes, climbed through, walked back through the arena. front row. He sat down, alone. The seat beside him was empty. The program was in his pocket. The ring was still lit. The briefcase was still there. The $120,000 was still in it. Big Tom was still standing under the spotlight, completely bald, black shorts, black boots, enormous muscles, carrying the weight of something he could not yet explain, looking at the place where Bruce Lee had been, still searching for the explanation that was not coming. Vince McMahon stood at ringside, complete brown suit, white shirt, black tie, black hair, microphone at his side, looking at the untouched briefcase, expression of someone who has just watched 2 years of certainty disassemble itself in under 2 minutes. Bruce sat in the front row and looked at the ring and said nothing for a long time. Then he reached into his jacket pocket, took out the program, opened it to the folded page, smoothed the crease with his thumb. 8.2 seconds. 90 men. Not one of them asked the right question. They all asked, "How do I survive?" Nobody asked, "What does he give away in the first 1.5? He put the program back in his pocket, looked at the ring one more time, stood up, walked out of Madison Square Garden. The city was indifferent outside, carrying Friday night forward the way cities carry everything, without knowledge of what one of its arenas had just held. The briefcase sat at the edge of the ring, $120,000 untouched. Bruce Lee never collected it. He never asked. He did not come for the money. He came for the 8.2 seconds. He came for the number that said no human being had found the answer. And the answer he gave was not the answer of a man who had found a way to survive, which was what 90 men before him had been trying to find, but the answer of a man who had made survival unnecessary, who had located in the geometry of the problem a position so precise that the question of survival never arose. That is Jeet Kune Do, not a style, not a system. The honest expression of the individual in the moment requires, which is the water that finds the way through every wall, because it has no fixed form to be blocked. 15,000 witnesses, 90 who failed before him, 1 who did not. October 1971. Madison Square Garden. The night the mountain met the water. And the water, as it always does, won.